Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Cohen, and I chair the Planning and Development Committee, which we are having a meeting of right now. This is our April meeting, April 28th at 5:30 p.m. I have our vice chair of the committee, Councilman Craig Cobb, here, as well as a member of the committee, Council President Tony Kuda. We also have our other members of council joining us, Councilman DeWitt Foy, Councilwoman Sarah Stone, Councilor and Vice President Gail Larson. Councilman Jim Posh is not here. I'm not sure if he'll be joining us for this meeting, but we have a really great agenda. And I think we'll kick it right off. We are going to hear from the Landmark Commission and the Naylor Wellman firm on Landmark Commission governing ordinance proposed updates. And so I want to invite Wendy and Maisie Adams. You want to, and Margaret, is that you? Hi, Margaret. We've done a lot of emailing, but we've never met in person yet. Yes. So if you want to come up and start, present, and I just, as context, but you'll go into more detail. So this is the updating of this ordinance is something that began 3 years ago and culminated 2 years ago, and then got lost in the abyss. So we're bringing it back, and after the presentation is over, we'll have some time for questions and discussion about next steps and moving forward. Oh, our law director has, and I didn't mention that Mayor Petrus is here as well. We have our law director. Okay, Wendy, take it away.
Thanks, Maisie.
Maisie's good.
Just
Okay.
do a quick introduction. I'm Maisie Adams and Margaret Land, and we are members of the Landmark Commission. I'm the chair. We've been on for a while. And it is preservation is a passion for both of us. It's what we do in our real lives, and then what we do for the city. And it's very dear. And the Landmark Commission has been around, and we'll probably duplicate some things since 1973. And our whole job is to preserve the wonderful historic buildings and other features in Cleveland Heights. And since 2019, actually since the master plan that the city created in 2017, the Landmark Commission has been looking at ways that we can work with the city planning department and others to update the ordinance, bring it along in alignment with our neighbors who have stronger ordinances than we do, and with national preservation standards. And we've gone through a number. There was an initial change in 2019 that happened to the ordinance. And then following that, we created with Naylor Wellman the design guidelines, which is a wonderful document. If you have not seen it, it's a wonderful document for all property owners in Cleveland Heights, but particularly historic landmark property owners for guidance on maintenance and upkeep of their homes. And then in 2023, we worked with the planning department to contract again with Naylor Wellman to work on do a very comprehensive review of our ordinance. And so that is what we're presenting tonight. We presented to you the best version of the landmark ordinance updates, really bringing us up to industry standards, essentially, and in alignment with our neighbors. We know that some pieces and parts may be concerning, possibly, to people. So we are here to answer questions, and particularly to have Wendy answer questions as well. So do you have anything to say? No. All right, I'm going to hand it off to you, and maybe
Thank you, Maisie. It really has been our honor to work with the city of Cleveland Heights, starting with design guidelines, as Maisie mentioned. This has just been an ongoing project now. I can't believe it. I think for 5 years we've been working together. So we've really gotten to know Cleveland Heights. We've heard a lot from the community members along the way, which is really helpful to us. We put together a presentation. I've renamed you. I apologize. I thought I was coming to the Planning Commission, so we can correct that going forward. But first of all, can you tell me how to switch slides here?
Try the.
Do I do this? Can I just do this?
I think it's the left and right.
The left and right?
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. Okay. So this was a presentation sometimes technology. This was a presentation that we had put together a number of years ago for a public meeting to kind of introduce the concept of what the Landmarks Commission does, what the ordinance is about, and I will move through this quickly tonight. I know this is only about 5 to 10 minutes of an introduction because we want an opportunity for people to ask specific questions. Macy touched on the history, which is always where I start, of the Landmark Commission. Really, since 1973, you've had a landmark ordinance. Certified local government came along in 2019, which allowed you to align with state and federal standards. This also allows for consistency in design review and makes decisions from a Landmarks Commission very defensible, which is really important. We did the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines in 2021 to update, and here we are at the Landmark Commission ordinance, which we're 3 years in and we're hopeful to get it there. We started the process with goals. Maisie touched on the goals, basically to update the clarity, conciseness, and alignment with Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Those standards are used by the National Park Service and used nationally for design review as the standards to follow when doing review. That was our guidance throughout the process. We also took a look at private property rights. We reviewed the process for landmark designation. We were focused on being sure that the design criteria were broad enough to be equitable and inclusive. We were looking at criteria for property owner initiated changes. We looked at the certificate of appropriateness application, and we examined demolition, owner provisions, and created an appeal process. So the ordinance that you have before you has also had public comment. SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, has reviewed it because this was part of a grant initially. So that's part of their grant requirements to do a review. And also we've had law director, I think I saw Bill walk in a moment ago. Oh, there you are. Law director input on this as well.
Wendy, I'm just going to remind my council colleagues that I sent you the red line of the amended ordinance in my email last week with the agenda for tonight. So if you want to look for it, that's where it is.
Okay, great. The Landmark Commission has 7 members. We went back and forth and landed on designating at least one member as to be an architect, and also dropping to one alternate member to be included as a just in case for quorum purposes or whatever. Powers and duties, basically Landmark Commission is charged with protecting the historic properties of Cleveland Heights. The purpose of the Landmark Commission is important. It's kind of the basis of what the general welfare, how they're acting in the general welfare of the community. We didn't change this section particularly, but basically it's important that's to safeguard the heritage of the city of Cleveland Heights, to stabilize and improve property values, protect and enhance city of Cleveland Heights heritage, attractiveness to residents, the visual and aesthetic character, diversity of the city of Cleveland Heights, basically foster civic pride and accomplishments of the city of Cleveland Heights. Promote and use preservation of properties for the education and welfare of people of the city. Safeguard the architectural integrity of the city's designated landmarks. Promote environmental sustainability. This is something we did add to come in alliance with the general ordinances of Cleveland Heights to make sure that environmental sustainability was something that was taken into consideration. Seek alternatives to demolition or incompatible alterations, and encourage development of vacant landmark properties in accordance with neighborhood character. So one thing to take away from this slide is sometimes there's confusion with what's landmark property and what's National Register property. You have a lot of wonderful National Register districts in Cleveland Heights. That is a national designation recognizing those properties. It's important to the history of the country. It does not invoke any kind of local design review. That's where landmarks comes in. City of Cleveland Heights landmarks comes in with a designation of landmarks. Those landmarks are then required to come into this design review process under the ordinance. So that sometimes is a source of confusion, but those are two totally separate designations. Some properties can have both or just one of those. Criteria for designation, this was part of the ordinance before we came into the review. We took a look at it. It very closely aligns with federal standards for National Register listing. So this creates defensible criteria for designating landmarks, basically broad patterns of history. Is there somebody important who lived there? Is there important architect or architecture associated with the property? Or is there archaeological significance? So this was one area of the actual process for designation that we looked very closely at and tried to narrow the steps that it took to get to designation and keep it within the Landmarks Commission where there is the expertise to make a determination of whether a property does qualify for landmark designation. So in order for a property to be designated an individual, a group, an organization, a Landmarks Commission can fill out an application. Application's been filled out. The owner of that property is immediately notified with a written notification. A meeting is set. Again, the owner of the property gets another written notification that that meeting is happening. The meeting is held in order to hear public input on the decision-making process. Then after the meeting, the commission will prepare a historic report outlining what they see as the significance of the property. They'll make a decision within 60 days, schedule a second public hearing, and then after they make a decision, 60 days, and the landmark is designated. So this is a good sheet to summarize because that goes on for a couple pages in the ordinance, but you may want to come back to that for a shorthand version. Historic design review, we just spent time reviewing the certificate of appropriateness process. I don't think we did a lot of changes with that. I'll move past that. Again, the design guidelines, we worked on them, but I still think they're a very interesting read. If you're interested in the history of Cleveland Heights, there's whole sections on the styles, types of architecture in Cleveland Heights, and also gives a very detailed process on how to go through the certificate of appropriateness process, what criteria is used, and the Landmarks Commission, we were awarded an award from the Cleveland Restoration Society. So we're very proud, and the Landmarks Commission did an outstanding job with that document. So what I'm going to move now is at somebody's house.
Yes, it's my in-laws.
Sorry.
Nice house.
Small world here in Cleveland
Very
Heights.
excited about this house for a moment. So I'm just going to touch, we just have a couple slides. These were specific issues that we spent a lot of time addressing in landmarks. One was owner consent. So the way that the ordinance is written right now is there must be owner consent for a landmark designation. So we looked around at, this might be a little small to read, but we looked around at a lot of neighboring properties that were either major cities or suburbs of major cities to see what their requirements were. If you're following due process, it requires notice and opportunity to be heard. It doesn't require consent. It's like zoning, where if someone is subject to a zoning ordinance, they don't get to come in and say, well, no, I don't really consent to that. It's similar to that, but we must require, and Bill can talk about some of that further, but we must do some kind of owner notification to allow for public input in the decision-making process. So what we did is we did 26 different communities. We've got, Akron Alliance, Cleveland, Columbus, Cuyahoga Falls, Marysville, Oberlin, Shaker Heights, Toledo, Ravenna, Lakewood. All of them require written owner notification. None of them require owner consent. We did look down here. We found 7 communities that do require owner consent: Burton, Euclid, Gates Mills, Hudson, Medina, Newark, Willoughby. So we felt like that was a sample of what is going on out there in other communities. How are people updating their landmark ordinances? And this is where we came back that generally owner consent is not being required. So that was one thing we worked into the ordinance to make an effort to get owner consent, to provide several written notices to the owner that their property was being designated, but that owner consent was not required. Another thing we looked at, I have allergies, let me just take a second, was proximity. So these are properties that are on the same side of the street as the landmark property, properties across the street, all other properties abutting the landmark property. And the way we entered this into the ordinance was if there is property that's in proximity to a landmark, Landmarks Commission would like an opportunity to comment to the Architecture Review Board on the impact of changes going on construction on those properties. And that's how that was written into the ordinance. Landmarks doesn't have the authority to approve or not approve that because they only do designated landmark properties, but they have an opportunity to comment, and that is included in the ordinance.
Wendy, just
Yes.
before you move off of that, so just to clarify, this would be the 3 categories you had on the last slide.
Yes.
That would be if properties in those categories are going to be in front of the ABR for design changes, the Landmark Commission would have the ability to comment on that
Yes.
at the ABR, but it's not a decision making.
No, because the way it's written right now is landmarks can only review designated landmark properties.
Right.
And this just allows for situations, and I've seen this in communities where there's some major construction going on next door and it's an opportunity to comment.
So this provides
At
only
this
an
point.
opportunity for in the red lines that we have right now.
Yes. Demolition. So there was an interest in strengthening the demolition ordinance. We put some language in that if the property, if there's a fire, the property burns down, still the building department has priority on whether that house has to be demolished, due to safety. They don't override any situation like that. But this is where someone comes in, wants to demolish a property. Sometimes you see tear downs. People call them tear downs, where they want to tear down a smaller structure, build a larger structure on the property. This allows landmarks to examine whether the proposed new construction or proposed changes or alterations, or this allows them to do an economic feasibility analysis to see whether if there is a path to rehabilitation of that property that's economically feasible without tearing it down. So that's supported by the Secretary of Interior standards as a direction to go. The owner, and then in addition, if they do get approval to tear down, they must present plans for what the building will be that will replace the building that was torn down on the lot. These are pretty standard procedures in other communities for doing demolition. We also added a section where if there's a pending landmark application during this process, a property can't be demolished during when a landmark application is in process. And the mandatory stay after the building is allowed to be demolished, it has to wait for 30 days. A lot of communities do 30 days or 60 days, just on the outside chance that maybe someone will come along and save the building. It just gives people a little time to cool off sometimes. And then the last item we did, we added an appeal process that anybody adversely affected by decision of landmarks appeals to council. And there's been some comments and feedback we're looking for feedback to align this with other committees and commissions that are in the city to go back. So that was it. I went a little over my time, but that just gives you kind of the overview of where our focus was, where we spent a lot of time, and we welcome any questions that you all may have.
Are there any questions from council?
What was the reason for providing an appeal to a political body to decide, whereas presumably the underlying decision is made by an apolitical body?
Yeah, I've seen appeals that go straight to the Cuyahoga County Court of Appeals. That's another direction if you all want to go that way, instead of taking it to council. There was a lot of discussion about this, and I would look to the law director perhaps for guidance on what works best. The struggle with going to council is there's a level of expertise with the landmark designation that can be challenging. But some communities do council, so.
I think all of our other quasi-judicial commissions or boards, it's an appeal directly to Common Pleas Court from the BZA, Architectural Review Board, Planning Commission.
Okay. I'm sure we can talk about that. Maisie or Margaret, do you have any comments on that? Yeah.
And if this moves forward with council, we can certainly put together some comparisons of what other communities do, what the other bodies in Cleveland Heights do, and so forth for council's consideration.
Any other?
I just have a question. How the provisions for the neighboring properties and the properties on the same side of the street and so on, is that common? Is that common in these?
I wouldn't say it's as common. I see it. It's a choice that, you know, all of the things that we talk about are choices within the community of what you all want to do. And we talked back and forth about proximity and the ability to have input to the Architecture Review Board. It's where we landed, but, you know, I'll let landmarks speak on proximity. I'm just kind of supporting their.
Right. I think for us, we are definitely focused on the individual properties, but our overall goal is the entire built structure of Cleveland Heights. And so if there is something, if we have a substantial landmark and there is new construction going in that is incompatible, you know, doesn't sit on the sight line or the property line in the same way, things like that, we would like to be able to have an opportunity to comment on that process. We recognize that we don't have control over it, right? But I think that sometimes our expertise can provide insights that maybe other professionals might not. And so it gives us an opportunity to say, no, let's have the setback be in alignment. You know, we're not going to stop new development or changes or things like that, but can we make it so that it is compatible with the neighborhood and with the historic properties, the landmarks that are in here? Thank you.
But, so I guess my question with that is, you know, architectural board review, seemingly anyone can come for public comment. So is the issue notice to the Landmark Commission, or?
I think that's part of it. That is something that we recognize can be difficult within the city structure even now when there have been properties that are landmark properties that we don't even, you know, are going through and get it. So any way that we can formalize notice is helpful.
Because I don't know, when we go as individuals, are we appearing representing landmarks if we just come at public comment, or are we just coming as individuals who live in Cleveland Heights? So I guess it kind of formalizes our input on things if it's part of the process rather than just us appearing.
Any other questions?
There was reference to exterior changes, property changes. and requiring a certificate of appropriateness for property changes, exterior alterations, new constructions, et cetera. Could you expand on property changes and what, is involved in that? Is that any landscaping? Is that only, property changes to the building?
I can probably grab
I'll
that
have
one
May.
and Margaret can do that as well. Generally, we're looking at hardscaping and significant hardscaping. So if you we don't often review property, but if you are significantly changing your driveway, and if you're now making it a turnaround that goes right through the front yard, that's gonna change and something that we would look at. If you are significantly changing retaining walls or other pieces of the property that aren't part of the historic fabric, that would be something we'd like to review. Softscaping, landscaping, things like that.
They'd be focused on the character defining features of the property, that's the starting point. So when there's an historic destination made, there are defined character defining features. So when those are impacted, which is Maisie talked about, with changing a whole driveway configuration, or usually it's an alteration to the house, windows,
That's what we're looking at.
roof change, materials, that's what they're looking at.
And this may be more a question to you, but in terms of districts, is this our opportunity to discuss that, or is it?
No, I think that would be better with the zoning code update, right, for landmark historic districts?
Correct, yeah. Like landmark districts.
That's addressed
It's
here.
in this.
Oh.
Yeah,
It's in this ordinance.
But I don't
So could
think
we-
you made any,
Could we discuss that?
yeah, sure.
Could you just expand on any changes
I
to
think the
landmark
primary
districts and why
change-
you think those are
Help
important?
me out, Macy, because we've been doing this over 3 years.
It's been a while
But
since
where we started was, I believe there was there 50% owner approval before?
currently.
And this goes to the owner consent direction that we, that we were going towards owner notification rather than owner consent. But there is no owner consent related to a historic district designation. But the way the district goes is, again, you'd have to come up with a defined definition of what is historically significant about the district and determine what properties contribute to that significance and don't contribute. As part of the requirement, there has to be a list specifically of which properties are contributing and which are not contributing. But there's an opportunity in Cleveland Heights, because of all the National Register nominations, to tag on to the National Register nominations where a lot of that work has been done. Maisie, do you all have anything to add to that?
We're just double checking.
I believe we updated it to say that it required a certain percentage of opposition letters mailed in.
To stop a designation
stop
of the
A
district.
district
Yeah, I'm
designation.
sorry, I can't recall at the top of my head but I'll take a look at that.
What, can you, Maisie or Margaret, can you talk to or speak to the implications of a historic district being declared? It's for,
So we don't have any locally designated historic districts at this point. We were not able to do that until the revisions that were done in 2019. If there is a locally designated historic district, then every property that's in that geographically defined district would have to follow the steps for a certificate of appropriateness for exterior changes to the building. And I maybe oversimplify, but I typically say those changes are permit required. So if you have to pull a permit for changes, then that's what's gonna trigger the a certificate of appropriateness. If you're painting your house, you're not required to pull a permit. Landmarks is not gonna review that property. And there are also very simple things, like you have to pull a permit to do a roof, but if it's just you have a shingle roof and your asphalt shingle and you're replacing with asphalt shingle, that's something that could be reviewed administratively by staff and not even require. So those types of situations and what would go for the certificate review, the design review, are described in the larger design review document.
Yeah, and again, it would be the contributing properties within that district would come under review, which is part of what's required. I believe we removed owner consent for districts to be consistent with the individual designations, because I'm not seeing it in there, but we'll double check that, just to be sure.
Then on that, is it, would it be the same process in terms of designation that could be initiated by landmark commission, an individual, a property owner, or could be initiated by anyone?
And I think, Maisie, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the reason for having that notification, if somebody's really objecting, or if there's a community, a historic district of folks that are really objecting to this, I don't think that's where Maisie's shaking her landmarks wants to go.
We're not forcing a neighborhood to become a district at all. I think the goal, back in 2019, there was a push by some neighbors to create a district, and it was not supported by the full community and stopped.
A designation or a district?
To put a district designation back in 2019, and the majority of the neighbors objected, and we did not move forward. And that our goal is never to force anything. Our goal is to work with property owners, work with the city, work with everyone for the best opportunities for preservation. And so we're not looking to steamroll everyone to become a historic district. Although the entire city
Okay, thank you so much. I guess I just want, just for a minute, so we have this, I believe, teed up for consideration as legislation in May, but I want to get the sense of council, if there's anything here. I mean, we can make changes once legislation is introduced. We can make changes before legislation is introduced, but we can have that discussion here, or we can have it at committee of the whole, potentially on Monday. I think we have time.
It's close.
Okay, so are there any items of concern, anything that, I mean, I've heard that the appeal, it sounds like to be consistent with, on the appeals process, to be consistent with our other quasi-judicial bodies, we'll want to revert that to the Court of Appeals. I heard that as at least a broached and consensus point. I would agree with that.
Yeah, so I need to go back through the legislation, but initial thoughts are I'm somewhat concerned with the scope of both the districts and individual properties being created as landmarks without owner consent, without buy-in from the neighborhood, without some more safeguards around that. Knowing that the entire city could potentially be designated as a landmark, as uncommon as that would be, I think that we need to consider that very carefully. So that's I guess where my initial concerns are, and I want to go back through the legislation to check details.
Yeah, and I think that there are two places, right? There's owner consent for a property landmark designation, non-owner consent for a property designation, but also non-owner consent for a historic district, and we can be consistent on that. We can decide differently for each, but there's two separate parts to that. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? Immediate feedback? Craig?
I just think it's very important that we give the residents a lot of notice on this. I understand we had some prior meetings. I'm sitting here looking at the video to see how many people actually went to the last community forum. Because this does represent some significant changes if it goes through. And again, people are not paying attention like they should be.
I was just going to say to kind of piggyback on that, those residents who are affected by a landmark, those property owners, I think there should be a notice provision for them that the properties be considered for landmark designation, so that they
Oh,
have.
that's in
in
here.
Is that
That-
okay?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
all right, that's
notice
in
is
there,
required,
yeah,
You
yeah.
just don't need their consent.
Right, it's just after it goes through the 2 meetings, it can be designated without owner consent. I guess, but one question while we're talking about this for Margaret and for Maisie is has there been, or what is the Landmark Commission's position on when an owner would come in? Did you discuss that and say the owner says, I don't wanna be designated a landmark?
So right now, we require owner consent.
Right.
So as an example of something where I think not requiring owner consent could have been of value is the Mayfield Theater building that was on Mayfield near Noble and Lawrenceville. A lovely building. It was mixed use. It had the theater and storefronts, and it was out of town landlord, basically owner of that property, who just decided demolition. And they tore it down, and it has been an empty field. Now, there are rumors that something new might be coming in, but it has been a loss for that neighborhood. I mean, it's exposing the neighbors to the traffic of Mayfield, which they never had before. It's a loss of income for the city, and it's a loss of a significant property in the community that could have had a much better use going forward. That's an example of a place where maybe not requiring owner consent could have had an effect and preserved that building. It is not a step that we would ever take lightly. It is not something generally I think we would ever really consider doing, particularly in a very difficult situation. And I think it would be something we would not do arbitrarily.
So is there in the current ordinance or in the proposed, and I think the answer is no, but there's no distinction, correct, between residential properties and commercial properties?
Correct.
Because that one is a commercial property.
Right.
And I'm wondering from the risk management standpoint if if greater concern might arise in connection with residential property being designated as landmark.
I don't know that we would make that distinction or that distinction between residential and commercial. And I think Naylor Wellman can probably talk. You can talk better, Wendy, on this, but the legal issues around owner consent are not as significant as one.
Yeah, I just meant the likelihood of suits, not the likelihood of success necessarily.
That's right.
Yeah.
His perspective on that. I've never seen a community that differentiates between commercial and residential, which makes me think maybe there's maybe there's some constitutional reason behind differentiating those,
You could-
we could look into it.
I mean, I think you
I just
could
didn't know if
have-
there had been discussion
No.
or anything like
We
that.
discussed it, and I think I probably discouraged it because I'm looking at federal guidance of how
I don't
guidelines
know,
work
yeah.
now, and so I'm never seeing that separation.
I think you could have an extremely significant residential property that then ends up in the hands of an owner that may not even live in it or take care of it, and it's a loss to the community. And that's where a tool like this would be important.
Director Hannah, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest that, and I think we've had some of this conversation at the special meeting 2 Sundays ago. If council would like, there are some additional suggested edits and cleanups that, I think I would like to propose, and the planning director and I talked through some of those this afternoon. I guess my thought process would be to do that, have a draft that council can discuss before introducing the legislation. And that's mostly just because from a process standpoint, I think it's cleaner to not put legislation on and then change it, because I think the public has a hard time following it. That's all.
That's fine. I'm okay with that. Does that sound okay? Can I ask that you change the appeals process as
Yeah.
part of that? Since I feel like that's one consensus that
Common pleas, yeah.
I think that would be helpful. And can I suggest if there are other I mean, we'll discuss it, but if there's some, just for the law director, so we've had this question of owner consent generally, but for both historic districts and property. We've talked about appeals. And then I also feel, as I was looking through this, the proximity piece doesn't seem clear
I
to
agree.
me.
That's one of the things I want to try to address.
So
'cause
could
there's-
you, yeah,
There's a reading that suggests that the impact of the ordinance could be more
put a
substantial.
designation,
Yes.
rather, yeah, so
For the
if you
creating
could.
district every time there's a landmark designation.
Yeah, so if you could take a look at that, and also the proximity piece of just how that would integrate with the ABR, that I don't know if that's like the clearest.
And I think there's some just technical issues related to meetings and setting of meetings and designation of who sends notices and things like that I think we could change to, again, sort of make it easier for the city to live
And just,
without taking anything away.
yeah, and just one thing I'll say here, just to flag, and then we'll have to move on to the Taylor Merchants Association. Director Zam, did you?
When you're done.
Okay. It's just that the other piece that's out here is that we've had a very laborious process with landmarks where the landmark would recommend a designation and then it would go to the planning commission and the planning commission would be like, thank you for coming to the planning commission. We approve your landmark designation and send it back to the landmark designation. So that's another piece of cleanup was taken here to eliminate that extra step. So I just want to flag that if you're wondering why that was taken out. And
It just all happen in landmarks.
yes, and I would say from a planning commission perspective, it was always just a rubber stamp. Like I can't remember in 10 years that we were ever like, no, you shouldn't do this landmark. So to me, it doesn't make sense. It's more work for staff to run this through and kind of more time for everyone involved.
And I'll just be
Yeah,
brief,
yeah,
and
sure.
I don't, on this issue of owner's consent, I
Yeah.
think that's something there's no consensus on.
No,
right?
no,
Okay,
so
right.
I
And it
think,
seems to me that removing that, and I don't have a position on it right now, really, undermines the whole point, in my view, of a lot of this legislation.
how so?
Well, I think it could turn out to be an effective tool. Now, there should be a high bar to overcome an owner's objection, but I think there may be circumstances where you do want a provision like that in there potentially.
To overcome an objection as opposed to just removing consent entirely.
Right. I mean, my concern is that there could be an historic building that the person wants to sell and the new owner wants to tear it down. And
Yeah. So that I guess is a question, Director Hanna, I'll ask you to include if there are other ordinances that instead of removing owner, in the 7 maybe,
Yeah.
if there's a way, if there is owner consent required, that it can be overruled, so to speak, under.
I mean, as we speak right now, nothing's coming to
Right.
mind, but Wendy may know, or we can certainly do a little research.
I'm not aware of a situation where it can be overcome.
Not saying we can't be the first, just be good to, that's the direction we want to go.
So I would ask if there are any other ordinances or even policies prior to issuing a demolition permit that would be reviewed for appropriateness outside of the landmark designation. I don't know that exists, but
Within the city of Cleveland Heights.
Yeah.
For demolition, there's.
If somebody applies for a demolition permit, it gets reviewed by the building department.
And the only reason, I mean, this would only be for already designated landmarks, then you have a problem if someone's coming to if your property's not designated as a landmark, you can demolish it under, as you
yeah, I was
see
just
fit.
wondering if there was any other process by which you would review some of the reasons for appropriateness or similar as outlined in this document as an extra check.
I don't think they
It
exist.
doesn't sound like
Through
there's.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it, but we can look at that and put together some comments.
Okay, so we had high hopes of perhaps considering this legislation in May because it's Preservation Month. So I guess I'll ask Director Hanna, timing wise, to get us back a red line. When can we, council, expect that so we can make sure that it's scheduled on our committee of the whole?
Well, so what's today? 28th?
Yes.
So it won't be ready for the 4th. That much I can tell you. And then if the idea is to then have discussion in committee of the whole, I guess the question is what committee of the whole meeting would you be looking at?
Well, I mean, if you say you can have it by the 11th, then we can do it at I guess we'll have to,
Yeah.
we're gonna have this new formulation of committee of the whole, so we can fit it in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Then I will, Jared, just one point, so it came up, I think, earlier with Councilman Cobb. There had been a couple of meetings on this, but these were back in 2024. And I think this is a point that Bill was trying to make. I think it's our suggestion to hold a public meeting prior to the introduction of the legislation, because this is not zoning, so there is no required public hearing on it. So conceivably, you could have 2 readings and adopt it, but we would suggest that there be a public meeting,
Public hearing?
public hearing
Okay.
dedicated.
Or we could set it up as another planning and development committee meeting, the same way we're doing for the ADUs, if we could ever get that scheduled, right? I mean, we just want an opportunity for a presentation on the proposed legislation and an opportunity for public comment and for council to hear that.
If it's going onto your agenda, say on the 18th, something like that, I mean, you might be able to have a public hearing at the 11th or the 18th or the 25th.
That
That
would
might be
require the coordination of council calendars as well as recording, as well as the room.
right.
So we are struggling to schedule the ADU one as well, but yes, I mean, I think I'm okay with that. I presume Councilman Cobb, you recommended that prior. So this will just be a timing.
Well, I think we should have the legislation pretty well worked out.
Yes, I think that was the
first, and then,
recommendation.
I'd like to have at least, 2 weeks of email city blasts about the proposed legislation and put it in layperson's language. This is how it could affect you or potentially affect you. Rather than other than just putting it, we're gonna make some changes to the landmark language. You really need to explain to the public what'll happen if this legislation goes through and how it potentially impacts you.
We could do a landing page for this, like we've done on the website for other. We do, right, so we can just, I'm saying we could put this and we can put more information there and direct people there as well.
We need to add some bullet points in plain English.
Okay.
Another FAQ, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. All right, the time is running away from us, but thank you very much. It sounds like I feel good that we have at least a timeline and a plan, and we're gonna move this forward after a number of years of work. So thank you so much, really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
So thank you. We have Myra Ornstein here and the Taylor Road Merchants Association. So, do you wanna come join us at the table? We have more rolly chairs we could bring up.
Move over so you can see.
Michelle just had to leave, she was saying, you're okay. You are very much a part.
You want one more?
Nope, we were hoping the rabbi would join us. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working on Noble Road and Taylor Road for quite some time now, and thanks to a lot of work with Bill and our attorney, we finally have Noble moving forward and we're making progress with that. But I want to talk to you tonight about Taylor. And I had done a full presentation last year and brought copies of that. If anybody wants to see them, I can leave them with you or I can email them to you. But what we want to talk about tonight is creating a district in Taylor for Merchants Association. And this is not to be confused with a SID. We are looking forward to doing this Merchants Association. So just to give you an idea of the boundary, we're looking at slightly south of Severance up to where Quintana is, almost at the corner of Meadowbrook. It covers that area, and it also covers a corner of Cedar Road that goes from about Bremick to that corner and Wood Trader to that corner. We are not getting involved with University Heights at this point because we just feel like we've been advised actually by many people in Cleveland Heights that we should just not worry about that for now because they have changes going on in their community. There had been previously a merchants association that encompassed that area, which is across the street from,
It is, so there had been a Cedar Taylor Merchants Association formed in 2012 that was very much just the intersection of Cedar and Taylor. It did not include the Orthodox community.
yes. And
So for historical sake, I think my husband was on that board for a hot minute, and then they ended up
Yeah.
not.
So the area across from Rising Star, that strip is not included, that is University Heights. So when we're looking at Cleveland Heights, we're looking basically everything that is north of Cedar, on that part. But to Laura's point, and by the way, Laura is president of the
Okay.
organization, so that's why she's here.
So, yeah.
And the rabbi is very much involved in the organization. What we're trying very hard to do is make this inclusive because, to Laura's point, the previous organization pretty much ended at Superior. It didn't even really go that far. So it went basically from Cedar to Superior, and it covered the area where Quintana's is. So it's that corner all the way to Superior. But then the rest of Taylor was just omitted completely from the conversation. So part of our goal, especially because we see that there's a burgeoning Orthodox community in Cleveland Heights, is that we want to make sure that everybody's involved and we want this to be a total community and we don't want it to stop at Kane Park. So we are going the other lengths. And the rabbi is on our board. Thank you very much. And we also are encouraging other members of the Orthodox community to be on our board. And so we really have a mix of building owners and merchants that are involved with us. Our goal over a 3-year period is to determine in that third year, we're looking for funding for 2 years. We're trying to decide in the third year, should we stay a merchants association or should we become a SID? There are a lot of properties along Taylor that are nonprofits, which make it a very different kind of situation than the other districts that have SIDs, because we'd have blocks where there would be spaces. And because we'd have to get the 60% allotment in order to become a SID, it becomes difficult when we've got nonprofits in between, which wouldn't have to participate in the SID. So with that in mind, I have brought samples of what we're looking for the budget. And we did this as a 3-year budget with the understanding that the merchants would pick up in some way, shape, or form in year 3. So we're looking for funding for years 1 and 2.
And Myra, if I could just stop you there and maybe ask either the mayor or director Samt or Hannah. So because this is a continuation of the work from the last administration,
Right.
And the funding, can somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is the ARPA?
No, they are-
Not
so
sorry,
I-
is the revenue replacement funds?
It's the
that-
revenue replacement.
Yes,
Yeah.
so there was the intent from the last administration to stand this up, but this was the second part after NABA. Now that NABA took a little bit longer than anticipated and is now stood up, contracted, moving forward, we're just executing what the intentions were from the, I mean, is
Right.
that a fair?
Well, what we're looking at, I think it was understood when Bill was working on the NABA grant, which took us a long time to kind of figure out what the requirements were, that NABA would act as a boilerplate pretty much for what Taylor's doing. And with that in mind, we've actually reduced the Taylor budget to match the NABA budget to make this a little bit simpler. But we're asking for similar kind of things. So it's basically a combination of a beautification budget and a marketing budget, with a concentration on branding. And so we do want to brand Taylor as an international kind of food district where people, if you look at the number of restaurants that are there, right now Taylor really is a pass-through street, and a lot of people just use it to drive down the street and they don't realize what its real strength of all of the restaurant community is there. And it's huge. I mean, if you think about if you walk down Taylor and think about the different kinds of cuisine that are in Taylor, it's underplayed completely. And so we're hoping that we could have events that really push that we involve a lot of families. We also want to get very involved with Kane Park, and we haven't had a conversation candidly with them yet, but there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that Kane Park could be so much more in the winter. We could have kiosks with hot chocolate. We could do different kinds of things. We could have merchants coming in and selling mittens or scarves, and we could really make it a very family-oriented, very kind of active place. And so we are planning to talk to them about any kind of collaboration with that. On that end, Noble is very interested in talking with the city about possibly having a senior van transport people from Noble to Kane Park to go sledding. They really love the idea of working with those people. And what's been beautiful about this whole thing for me is how well the two districts are working together. And it's to the extent that they want to have quarterly meetings together. They really want to support each other. And for those of you who didn't know, both districts got money from the county. And it turned out that there was more money available when Taylor approached the county than there was with Noble. So Noble got a $10,000 grant and Taylor got 20. And the same minute that they got 20, the Taylor people turned around and said, we're giving part of the extra 10 to Noble. And they've done that already. So it's been incredible working with both groups. And we will be having quarterly meetings that are combined.
And just a note on the budget, which, Myra and I spoke before the meeting. So the first 2 years, which is the funding that they're asking for, comes to the same amount of money. It's $317,060, I think. But it's the 305 that was budgeted for NAVA plus the $12,060 that was budgeted in the shared landscaping contract for the city, because Taylor Road Merchants Association is not able to be part of that shared contract because it wasn't included in the original procurement. So this is a way of allowing them to have the same greenscaping, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for your openness and willingness to match the Noble budget. It was something that I spent a lot of time, turning over and thinking about. And so I think as a matter of equity, it's really great that you're willing to go with 305 plus flowers.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we really want to try as hard as we can to make this happen as quickly as we can. And I did include some money in year 2, just in case the city decides that it does not want to cover the landscaping for Taylor, kind of as a contingency, because I don't want them to feel like they've been left behind. So it is in there, but we'll see how that works out. We've had conversations about a potential promotion. You should talk about this because it's your idea.
As you know, I am now a resident of Cleveland Heights, been here since 2024. But when I was working in Boise, we did an event called Big Truck Day. Lakewood does something similar. But what I envision is that we start at basically where the veterinary is on Taylor, which I always forget the name of the Oak Tree. But starting from there and actually having big trucks from the city or working with the Teamsters and the unions, and that at each spot is a storybook, because I ran a bookstore. Okay, so there's a storybook and there's somebody there reading that story, and there's someone that the kids can climb into the truck, get pictures taken, but that basically it's a hopscotch all the way along the street of trucks to go visit. And it's this it's a road trip where you visit all the big trucks. It's a very super family-friendly event, but it crosses all the boundaries, because regardless of your background, ethnicity, or anything, everybody loves to sit in a big truck.
This is true. We saw that at Fall Fest, although it was raining, so it was really hard it was cold, but.
Right, and but since the Liquor Inc. is there, that there would be writing opportunities. I'd like to work with the libraries, and when we did it in Boise, it was associated with the summer reading kickoff. And so there were signups for that, for people to get library cards. It was a whole thing, and I'd love to be able to bring that programming to Cleveland Heights.
And I've talked with CIA, and we were talking about doing chalk art, so we would have kind of a mapping along the sidewalk so people could see where the next truck was going to be. And we just figured it was a nice way for a family to spend an afternoon with their kids.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, how do we move this forward? And I guess the question is for anyone who might have an answer as to what comes next. Do you have any questions?
I have some questions.
Sure.
So this is a budget for 2 years
Right.
versus the 3-year funding that we provided for the Noble Merchants.
You gave Noble 2 with an understanding that they would pick up in 3.
Yes, that is correct.
And this is the same thing.
Okay.
It's exactly the same. It's meant to be the same.
identical. I mean, almost, other than the fact that we have some additions in here for kosher food, they're basically the same budget.
And what do you think your prospects are for being able to make this a self-sustaining merchants association after these 2 years? Or do you anticipate?
Unlike, so when I initially described the difference between a merchants association and a SID to both districts, Noble immediately said this isn't going to happen for a while with us. They couldn't see that the building owners would go along with a triple net lease. And they said that this is going to end up being a merchants association for as long as we can see it happening. Whereas Taylor, because of the size of the buildings and just the frontage area, we really wouldn't need as many buildings involved. The issue that we have again is that there are nonprofits in between. So if the nonprofits decide that they want to participate, then that would help put the budget over. But we still would need the authorization of the 60% frontage.
An advantage that Taylor does have with the potential of becoming a SID, there are quite a few of us who live here. Because Quintana's owns their own building, Evo Domos owns theirs, I own ours. There's a barber shop that's locally owned, Bremick is locally owned. There's actually, I'm not gonna say that I'm like 100% confident because we've not polled them and we honestly haven't showed what it can do because has to be some proof in the pudding. What are we actually going to demonstrate in order to have the building owners continue to invest in it? My own thing, so some of you are new to me, I own the building that the Haunted House restaurant is in, and that 4-spot space. But that is our hope, but even if it doesn't work, I believe that with the investment of the business owners, that we can have a successful merchants association. And so I don't see that there's a losing scenario for the Taylor Road district.
And also, so working with the rabbi, we have managed to include already, we did snow plowing on the sidewalks. We're going to offer landscaping opportunities to the Hebrew Academy. We really wanted to be all inclusive and to make sure that even though that is a nonprofit situation, that we're not leaving out that big chunk of property. That to me is part of what Taylor Road's all about anyway. So we really need to look at this as more of a district, which I don't think it was looked at that way really before. It was looked at in segments and we're looking at it as a whole.
I'm sorry, I got a little lost when you were describing the district because there's a lot of ifs there. So all the way from like where
Severn Road.
Rising Star and all that is all the way down to Severance, right?
Pretty much to Severance, but it doesn't go all the way to Severance because there's no.
Essentially to Masterworks, I think is the last.
Okay,
business.
all right.
And is it it doesn't include University Heights,
No,
correct?
correct.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Is Washington the dividing line? Is that
No, it goes further down.
farther.
Okay.
It goes, if you keep going past Oak Tree Vet, then there's like a couple of other businesses past that, and that's where it ends.
Right. No, I'm sorry, I meant between University Heights and Cleveland Heights. I was just trying to.
We're starting at the halal place across the street. Yeah.
The whole place is
Did
University
you like
Heights.
it? I haven't tried it.
Mr. President, if I might, with regard to the question of addressing funding in year 3 and beyond, because the template boilerplate created for NABA includes it, this agreement would also include some requirements for the Merchants Association to be working with the Economic Development Department to talk about what that plan is going to look like and see if the city can provide help or guidance and so forth.
Yeah. And Taylor's already talking about it, about how to work with this, because the Noble situation is very different and because there aren't as many building owners on the board. We are going to have major conversations about what the next steps are and how the due structure would be and everything else.
So how would a merchants association continue unfunded by the city as a merchants association?
They would have to collect dues
From the business owners.
Which would be
from the
optional.
business owners. Yeah,
Like I
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
It is, unlike I said, right.
unlike I said.
And
And
then-
so, go ahead.
I was gonna say, because then it's all about how well are we delivering a product that makes a difference to them. It also requires a lot more just time on the ground because you have to have somebody who's really leading that merchants association by walking door to door and checking in with people and making sure they're included and it's a merchants association's a lot of work. But That being said, we have an abundance of locally owned independent businesses there where the ownership is here. So I'm gonna say it's possible, but I certainly think the SID is a more sustainable
Yeah.
vehicle for doing it.
It's much easier to operate a SID. And if we had to go into a merchants association, we would have to establish some kind of ACH situation that we're guaranteed that the dues are coming in.
Yeah.
Because typically with a merchants association, the fall off is that someone's like, yay, we're gonna do a merchants association, and 6 months later they said, I don't have any money, I'm not doing this,
Never mind.
you know?
So how many merchants / owners are in and how many are out? Like right now, I'm sure you've canvassed the area, so you know how many there are total,
Right.
and then how many have
There's
committed to
70.
be part of it, and how many are like,
Well, we have 80, there are 80 potential,
Yeah.
and
80.
but I think we have participation from about, we've
Yeah.
got almost 100%
Yeah, it's almost
participation.
100%.
so 80 total and maybe 70
Yeah,
that have committed?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Committed for, are you talking about for the first 2 years, Mr. President? 'Cause right now it's funded by the city,
Yeah,
right?
that's-
Yeah, I mean,
Which is
right
to be-
now they're excited
just to
about
be
it.
part of the,
right, to be
you know,
part of
because
the,
that's all we could
I
talk
just wanted
about.
to, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes, to be part of the conversation and the
Mhm.
community.
and
Have responded
at the
to
table,
emails,
yeah,
actually
right.
communicated, done, yeah.
Shown
I've
up for
gotten-
meetings,
Shown up
that
for
kind of
meetings, between that, I think we're in very solid shape.
Yes.
So to answer your question earlier, I'm presuming we can just draft legislation similar to what we use for Noble and a contract similar to Noble with the
Have it by
same
next week.
provisions and safeguards.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think so somebody will submit a request to the law department to prepare a contract, and it could be frankly paired with a request for legislation, but I know that Brian and Julie have been meeting with Myra and working through some of the details and so forth, so I would expect that the contract will be pretty easy to put together using the pre-existing template, and from there, the legislation is pretty straightforward because we've done it.
And have you guys obtained 501c status yet, or you're working
It's
on that?
submitted, we
Yeah,
are
the
in.
attorney already put it through to the state, and we typically getting it from the state isn't a big deal, but the 501c3 is required, and we already are working with Future Heights, so we do have a fiscal agent in place.
So just for clarity's sake, Director Hannah, is it staff is it Brian and Julie that'll be submitting their request for contract, or is that coming from
Them or you, I don't know.
Brian and Julie? Would you like?
I mean, I guess we can go through the process. I mean, you know, based upon, it sounds like a consensus here at the committee to proceed with it.
Yes, I think we have a consensus. I think the budget is the same essentially as the NABA one, and the contract will be essentially the same. Director Zam?
Yeah, I think the differentiation is, who do you want the sponsor to be? Is it the mayor or is it the member of council? You want it to be you?
I'll be unless you feel strong
Could all
about
be
it.
listed.
Okay, we can all,
I mean, like
Yeah.
most pieces of.
like all of it, yeah. Okay. Great. All right, thank you so much. We're looking
Thank
forward to
you,
moving
this
this
is
forward.
terrific, and thank you for being so receptive to what we're trying to do.
We're excited. So I have cut into a little bit of our committee of the whole, but do we have, I know, I'm sorry. But do we have 5 more minutes? Just have Director Zamp to give us a quick update on the CIC and the,
Oh, okay.
okay, good.
It may not even take that.
That's, I figured as much, so.
I mean, come to the table.
Yeah. And
Okay,
Councilman
I-
Posh has joined us on time for the meeting that we're late for, so thank you. Okay, yes.
So thanks for inviting me to the table.
I know, she's fine.
You could complain about me later.
No,
Okay.
we're saying you're great at taking notes, thank you.
Oh, yes, okay, yes, I do.
You were actually
Compliment, oh, thank you,
See,
guys. Okay,
So thanks for inviting me to the table. We wanted to give just a brief update on our zoning rewrite project. And so we've had a lot of really good work coming out of our team, which is ZoneCode. And they, if you remember last time we presented on this, they sort of have a 4-step process, a kickoff meeting, they diagnose, calibrate, and then codify. So they've done a lot of work on the diagnose piece. They've provided staff with a draft of a diagnostic report, which we're going through. And the idea is that, and we also had a technical advisory group that we put together. We had a first meeting with that with a lot of good input. The idea is that as we move out of diagnose to calibrate, we would continue to coordinate with that technical advisory group. have a workshop with council to go over the diagnostic, but also push it a little bit so that there are some recommendations already thought of, so that we can get your input and they get your input on that. And then go out and have a public survey, a public meeting about all this, so that there's a lot of good work that's been done, but there's been some guidance provided by not only this advisory group, but also council and committee. And so it's looking like that would be in probably early June is when that's going to be. And so I don't know if you're going to be in this committee of the whole format or if it's back to committee, but we'll coordinate with you at that time.
Yeah.
And then beyond what we'll have, which is an open house, at least one open house, we're looking at the summer season to do pop-up events because that's the time when we have a lot of really good events around town. And so there's a whole engagement schedule that we're working on that we want to make public so that people start to really learn about this. And then in September, there'll be sort of another round of engagement and an open house, which then leads to the codification process, which will lead to the codification process. So this is all recommendations, ideas, and then we move into codification, which will be the fall. And that's where it'll be the red line documents. Here are the changes. One thing we spoke about in the technical advisory group, one of the residents of the community said, can you put this in layman's terms? So the idea is to say, like, there's a 500 pages here, but here are the categories of changes that are being made. So we really want to work on that and make it friendly. And then it'll be set up for an actual process to go through. So again, sort of look for early June as a touch point with council on this and input. And that'll be diagnostic report and early recommendations for where we want to go with this.
That's great. And then we had sorry, go ahead.
Well, in the early June for more of a workshop to be followed by first public hearing. Is that also, or not hearing, but meeting, town hall?
Exactly. We want to get your input first before going out.
And we're thinking that's also June, or is that?
June, July. That's what it says right now.
Okay.
How does this relate to the proposed housing code study? How do they mesh together?
It's a great question. So we're at a point now where those two consultants, it makes sense for them to start talking to each other. They've been sort of running off on their own, and now they've both done a lot of really good work. So it's time for those two things to influence each other.
Any other questions on that? Okay, that's proceeding apace. The CIC, the Community Improvement Corporation, just can you give a quick update as the interim executive director from our last few meetings, just because those meetings are not recorded, or they are recorded, but they're not live streamed on the YouTube.
Yeah, so the Cleveland Heights Community Improvement Corporation, which has been meeting for a while now with a number of members, we sort of hit a crisis of, how's that term go? Crisis of intersections. To figure out what are we? And so there have been over a number
Identity crisis,
that's what I was looking for, yes. Over a number of meetings, the board of directors was struggling with what was the direction to go. Should we go and hire an executive director? Should we hire a firm to help us strategize this? And the mayor really finally had an opportunity to think about it and say, what is the purpose of the CIC, particularly if one of its main purposes is to help get underutilized vacant properties back to productive use? If the city staff and Brian and Julie in particular, along with special counsel, are really doing this work itself. And so at our last meeting, which was last week, we had a long conversation about this, and the direction that the CIC board of directors would like to go is to sort of put it on mothballs, keep it alive and registered and there as a backup, but to use it as an advisory group to the mayor, to the department, and to council when it comes to vacant and infill housing. And so with that as the sort of direction, we're working with our special counsel and we'll be working with the law department to see what the next steps are. There will likely be legislation that's necessary for the council to consider. And then some funding conversations that we need to figure out, because there's ARPA funding that's designated to CIC. So it's a positive direction that we're moving in, and one that I think we all agreed this council and this administration are doing all of this sort of transparently anyway. So why have two entities that are doing the same thing?
And if I can,
Sure, of course.
and the members of the committee all seem to be pretty supportive. You know, it's interesting that the CICs that I've looked at are a little bit on the mischievous side. I'm talking about, you know, University Heights, a little bit mischievous. I should be naming, but there's a few others, you know, and you know, the branching, I mean, and they do it in their agency agreement, you know, with a wide scope and stuff. There's stuff going through the CICs, not going, you know, which kind of leapfrogs over council. And I think this is, you know, certainly not where this was going anyway. So if we were just doing perfunctory work, you know, it seems like, you know, it could be done by the administration.
Right, I think that was the headline of this, is that the work that was intended for the CIC is of such a nature that it can be done, and it's only about 140 properties that it could be handled by the administrative capacity that we have, and run through any disposition of property has to come through council anyway. So this way, this provides some more transparency, brings it in back to council instead of having it go through other places first and put more of an administrative burden on the city. So overall, it seems like it's a better direction. But we just felt, I mean, I don't even really know what the CIC was until I was told that as chair of planning and development, I was sitting on it. So now, you know, but I think that this will allow also just vacant properties, vacant lots, sorry, to be in the public eye, right? So any other, Mayor Petros, do you have any?
No, I mean, the primary purpose of the CIC was to more easily dispense of properties, and the staff demonstrated in the fall that they're able to do that. They successfully distributed a number of properties to Future Heights and Rebuild Cleveland and Ishmael Martin, and I'm totally confident that the staff is able to continue to do that. And so in talking with board members, it seemed that many of them were more comfortable with serving in an advisory role to the staff and to council whenever we receive proposals for properties, rather than putting a lot of time and effort into standing up an organization that our staff could already do the work of.
Oh, go ahead.
And any news on the reallocation of the ARPA money that was supposed to?
That's still a conversation.
Okay.
And that's actually what I was going to say, is that once we have more information on that, could we make sure that that's on a committee of the whole for an update? So you'll let us know timing for that.
Sure. That will likely involve council somehow.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was talking to our clerk on a matter. Is it the intention that we're still going to maintain the CIC, but it'll be semi-dormant in case something does arise in which we want to put some property in its hands?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one other point, sort of tying to the previous conversation you were having about the Merchant Association. Part of the decision making was we were all struggling with how to keep the CIC sustainable after those 140 or 150 lots were disposed of, and we really struggled with that. So again, we're going to keep it on the books, and there might be an opportunity to utilize it. But
I have an idea or two.
You want to mention them now?
Well,
We're all ears. While we're here.
Involving the acquisition of some larger apartment buildings. There's the one on Superior. I don't know what our plans are for that. That's near the community center, and possibly looking to acquire a building on Taylor Road, or if we have the opportunity to get a large structure from the land bank, renovating that property. And then using the proceeds from the rental income to fund similar ventures, or then sell that property to a private entity. I know that I think some other CICs have tried to embark on those ventures, and it becomes self-sustaining from their own efforts, and our selling our city lots at 1,000 or 2 or whatever would not be sufficient. But I would like us to look at that if we ever have the opportunity.
Well, and Mayor, can I mention?
Yeah.
So we are exploring, the administration is exploring through this RFP process that the CIC went through. There were some folks that were there to help with strategic planning, and one of the respondents, the county land bank, was one that we were thinking would be worthwhile perhaps the city engaging with to help strategize, whether it's the CIC or the city itself, doing things like that.
When we're insulated, using the CIC, doing that as opposed to the city. Okay, that answered my question. Sorry for the interruption.
All right, okay, with that, we will adjourn this meeting and we have a committee of the whole coming up.